Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Michelle, your friendly genealogy and history nerd. As genealogists, we often stumble upon weird or archaic job titles in old records and wonder, what on earth is that? I know the feeling well. When researching my own family, I discovered my great-grandfather was listed as a poundmaster in the early 1900s. And a third great-grandfather was recorded as a master butcher in 1820s Germany. I had no clue what those meant at first. A master butcher sounds straightforward, but it signified he had earned guild membership to run a butchery, a big deal back then. And a poundmaster? I imagined weightlifting or British currency, but it turned out to be something entirely different. These finds opened my eyes to how much the working world has changed over the centuries. Today, we're going to travel back in time and explore some truly lost professions, jobs that once existed from medieval times up to the 1950s, but have vanished throughout the years. We're going to go era by era, unpacking the strange, sometimes gross, often fascinating jobs that people did in the past. By the end, you'll not only impress your friends with trivia like, what's a gong farmer, but also gain a new appreciation for your modern desk job. So let's dive in. Life in medieval and Tudor-era Europe was tough, and so were many of the jobs. Forget the office work, these occupations could be messy, smelly, or downright bizarre. Here are a few unforgettable professions from the Middle Ages and Tudor England. Gong farmer of Tudor England. Despite the cute-sounding name, this was a literal crap job. A gong farmer was the poor soul hired to dig out and haul away human excrement from privies and cesspits. They worked only at night, for everyone's sanity, and carted the waste, politely called night soil, outside city walls to dump it. It paid well by the standards of the day, but consider the hazards. Historians note these workers often stood waist deep in sewage and risked suffocation from the fumes. Talk about really taking your work home with you, on your clothes, your shoes, your everything. This stinky profession started dying out as modern sewers and flush toilets came into use in the 19th century. And yes, genealogists have indeed found nightmen or gong farmers in old records. If your ancestor had that title, you officially owe them some respect and maybe an apology for their suffering. Groom of the Stool from the Tudor court. From the gutters to the palace, yet still dealing with poo. The Groom of the Stool was a high-ranking courtier in Tudor England whose job was to attend to the king's private matters, i.e., assisting His Majesty with going to the bathroom and personal hygiene. Yes, you heard that right. This person's duty was essentially to help the king wipe and wash. It sounds like the worst gig imaginable, but in a bizarre twist, it became one of the most coveted positions among the nobility. The Groom of the Stool was the king's closest confidant. When you share bathroom duty with the monarch, you gain a certain trust, and thus wielded considerable influence. They received a handsome salary, fancy hand-me-down royal clothing, and constant access to the king's ear, among other body parts. One historian famously dubbed it the original job that noblemen would kill to have. And it's true, many courtiers really wanted the role. Over time, the job evolved to focus more on managing the king's bedroom and finances, but the personal bathroom duties remained part of the deal. Surprisingly, this position lasted all the way until 1901, ending when King Edward VII decided to handle his own business. So next time your boss gives you a crappy task, just remember, at least you're not literally cleaning up after a Tudor king. The wool fuller of medieval Europe. Ever complain about doing laundry? Be glad you weren't a medieval fuller. Fullers were responsible for cleansing and softening wool cloth, a critical step in making wool fabric wearable. Sounds simple until you learn their secret ingredient: stale urine. Yes, you heard that right. Urine's ammonia helped remove oils and cleanse the wool. Fullers would literally wade and stomp in tubs of week-old urine, trampling the cloth for hours. Phew! It was smelly but effective. In fact, urine was so important that some governments taxed it. This job dates back to ancient Rome, but was especially vital in medieval England when the wool trade boomed. So if you find an ancestor listed as a fuller, give them props for literally taking a piss to put clothes on people's backs. Your comfy sweater back then owed a lot to someone's bladder-filled day job. Ale conner, also known as an ale taster. Now for something a little lighter. In many medieval towns, an ale conner, or ale taster, was an official job. Their duty? To go around local taverns and sample the beer and ale to ensure quality and fair prices. Imagine being paid to bar hop and taste beer. Sounds like a dream job, right? But hold your cheers. Before hops were common, ale spoiled quickly, so tasting could be a sour experience. One legendary method was that ale tasters wore leather breeches, poured some beer on a bench, and sat in it. If their pants stuck, the ale had too much sugar and it was of poor quality. Whether or not that sticky pants test really happened, ale tasters did exist and could become quite unpopular when they fined brewers for bad beer. The position largely fizzled out by the 19th century as formal health inspectors and regulations took over. But a few ceremonial ale tasters are still appointed in London even today. Cheers to a bygone profession that was truly on tap in the community. As you can see, medieval and Tudor life had some unforgettable occupations, whether it was scooping human waste by torchlight or literally sitting on the job, in ale or in palace privies. People did whatever dirty work had to be done. It really makes us appreciate modern inventions like indoor plumbing and labor laws. Now, moving on from the age of knights and castles, let's fast forward to the 18th and 19th centuries, the Georgian and Victorian eras, where industrialization and urban life created a whole new batch of odd jobs. The 1700s and 1800s brought huge changes: the Industrial Revolution, booming cities, and new science curiosities. With these changes came a golden age of strange professions. In Europe and America, enterprising, or desperate, people took on all sorts of work to make a living, no matter how dirty or bizarre. Let's explore some of the most notable obsolete jobs of the Georgian and Victorian period. Sin Eater. This one toes the line between job and folklore, but it was indeed practiced in parts of Britain. A sin eater was a person hired to spiritually take on the sins of someone who had just died by eating a ritual meal off the corpse or over a coffin. The family would place bread, salt, or beer on the deceased, and the sin eater would consume it, supposedly absorbing the departed's sins so they could rest in peace. After the meal, the sin eater was often chased away or shunned. Having taken on all that evil, they weren't welcome to stick around. Sin eating was most common in rural Wales and England's border counties, and usually it was a job for a poor or desperate person. They got a few pence and a free meal for their trouble. The practice died out by the late 19th century as religious attitudes changed. It was literally a grave gig. You might say sin eaters really ate their wages. If you ever hear the phrase, "eat your sins," now you know it's not just metaphorical. Thank goodness this profession is resting in peace. Resurrectionist, or body snatcher. In the early 1800s, medical schools desperately needed cadavers for anatomy lessons, but donating your body wasn't exactly a popular notion then. Enter the Resurrectionists. People who made a living, illegally, by digging up fresh graves and selling the corpses to anatomists. Yes, this was a real job in the shadows of the Georgian and Victorian society. It was ghoulish work, but the pay was good enough that these entrepreneurs were willing to brave angry mobs and hangman's nooses. Authorities often turned a blind eye since doctors needed those bodies. Resurrectionists had a grim but clever system. They'd dig a tunnel to the head of the coffin, break it open, and haul out the body with hooks, taking care to leave behind jewelry and clothes so it was legally just corpse removal, not theft. Families were terrified of Grandma's body being snatched. Some placed iron cages called mort safes over graves, and armed guards patrolled cemeteries at night. The trade largely died out after laws like Britain's Anatomy Act of 1832 provided a legal supply of bodies, and after a few body snatchers went too far, looking at you, Burke and Hare, who skipped digging and started murdering people to sell, it's safe to say this is a job that should stay buried in the past. If an ancestor of yours was politely termed a resurrection man, well, I'd keep that one a family secret. Tosher. A Tosher was a sewer hunter, scrounging through Victorian London's labyrinth of brick sewers by lamplight, looking for coins, jewelry, or scrap metal that got washed down the drains. These were the daredevils of the underbelly, sometimes working in teams, armed with nothing but a rake, a lantern, and a strong stomach. They often have to contend with rats, toxic gases, and the ever-present danger of a sudden surge of water if someone upstream pulled a flush at the wrong time. On a good day, though, a Tosher could actually make a decent haul. The tosh, or treasure they found, especially bits of copper or lost silverware, could add up. In fact, reports from the time suggest an industrious Tosher might earn more than a skilled laborer. One source noted they could make about 6 shillings a day, which was double a normal laborer's wages. Not bad for wading through human waste. Still, it wasn't glamorous. They worked under cover of night, sewer hunting was technically illegal, and often carried knives to fend off sewer rats and rival Toshers. By the late 19th century, after London built better sewage systems and folks got indoor plumbing, the era of Tosher faded. Nowadays, no one needs to fish through poop for a paycheck, which I think we can all agree is a positive development for society. The Pure Finder. Here's a job whose name totally misleads. Being a pure finder sounds lovely. Are you finding something pure and holy? Nope. Pure was a code name for dog poop. Yes, in the 19th century, dog dung was called pure because it was used in tanneries to purify and soften leather. So a pure finder was a person, often older women, who roamed the streets collecting dog droppings in a bucket to sell to leather tanners. Victorian London streets had plenty of free-range dogs, so there was money lying around if you were willing to scoop it. The job actually started around the 1830s and at first wasn't too competitive. A diligent collector could make a modest living because tanneries eagerly sought the product. As leather production boomed, more people got in on the doo-doo trade, which, surprise, surprise, drove down prices. By the late 1800s, the market was oversaturated with poop. Imagine that economic problem. With only so many tanneries to sell to, and new chemicals being developed for leather processing, demand for doggy-doo dwindled. Eventually, this shit job, pardon the pun, became obsolete by the 20th century. On the upside, pure finders did help keep the streets a tad cleaner. But I bet they never imagined future folks like us would be glad that that job vanished, and that we'd rather not step in their legacy on the sidewalk. If your ancestor was listed as a collector of pure, Now you know the dirty truth behind that innocent title. Leech collector. Remember when doctors thought bleeding patients could cure everything? Back in the 1800s, medicinal leeches were in huge demand for bloodletting. Enter the leech collectors, often impoverished women who would wade into marshes and ponds, letting swarms of leeches latch onto their legs so they could gather them for sale. It was a miserable way to earn a living. A collector might use old horses or cattle as leech bait too, but more often it was human bait. The leeches would suck blood for 20 minutes or more, and even after you plucked them off, the bites kept bleeding for hours. Many leech collectors suffered chronic sores, infections, and significant blood loss. Some were said to look pale as ghosts. Well, I wonder why. In Wordsworth's 1802 poem Resolution and Independence, he even considers a worn-out leech gatherer, highlighting what a hazardous and weary job it was. By the mid-19th century, Europe had basically been overfished for leeches. They collected so many that leech populations declined sharply. Plus, medical science eventually, and thankfully, moved on from constant bloodletting. By the late 1800s, the job of leech collector was nearly extinct, and leeches themselves were nearly too. If you hate your job, just picture wading chest deep in a swamp covered in bloodsuckers for a few pennies. Suddenly, spreadsheets and Zoom meetings don't sound so bad. Phrenologists. In the Victorian era, there were plenty of pseudoscientists making a buck off people's curiosity. One standout is the phrenologist, basically a traveling mind reader who would examine the bumps and shapes of your skull and then give you a personality reading or career advice. Phrenologists claimed that each bump on your head corresponded to a trait, like benevolence, aggression, love of poetry, etc. During its heyday, from about 1810 to 1840, phrenology was surprisingly popular and somewhat respected. There were over 200 phrenology chart makers and lecturers in London alone, and even employers sometimes asked applicants for a phrenologist's character reference. People paid good money to get their heads examined, literally. It was basically the Victorian equivalent of those personality quizzes or astrology readings, but with more head massage. Of course, it was complete quackery. By the late 19th century, phrenology was debunked and became a fringe novelty. The idea that a lump behind your ear means you're good at math is, well, laughable. Phrenologists quietly disappeared as psychology and neurology actually advanced. Today, if someone offers to feel the bumps on your head to help you choose a career, you should probably back away slowly. But for a while, being a professional phrenologist was a legit way to earn a living. Before we leave the 19th century, I should note that not every job back then was bizarre or extinct. Many of our ancestors had normal trades: farming, smithing, weaving, shopkeeping. In my own family, for example, my 3 times great-grandfather, Landelin Schwander, worked as a master butcher in 1820s Germany. Being a master butcher meant that he had completed years of apprenticeship and earned guild membership to run his own butchery, a mark of quality and respect. That profession still, of course, exists today, but the old guild system he was part of is largely a thing of the past. It's fascinating how even the familiar jobs from centuries ago often had different conditions or social roles. That said, the Victorian era truly cornered the market on odd and unpleasant occupations, as we've seen, many born out of rapid urbanization and misguided science. Thankfully, most of those have vanished or evolved into something much less dreadful. Speaking of evolution, let's move on to the early 20th century, the 1900s through the 1950s, where technology and world events would transform the job landscape yet again, making a whole new set of once common jobs disappear. The first half of the 20th century was a time of incredible change. The advent of automobiles, electricity, telephones, and mechanization meant many traditional jobs were automated or rendered obsolete. 2 world wars and the Great Depression also shook up labor markets. By the 1950s, life and work looked very different from a century before. Yet even into the mid-1900s, there were still jobs that have since entirely disappeared. Let's look at some noteworthy examples from the 1900s to the 1950s. The knocker-up, the human alarm clock. Imagine it's 5 a.m. in an English industrial town around 1910. You have no alarm clock, that was too expensive or unreliable, but you need to wake up for your factory shift. What do? You hire a knocker-up. These were literally human alarm clocks who went door to door in the early morning hours, knocking on clients' windows or doors with long sticks to rouse them from their sleep. A knocker-up might use a light bamboo pole to tap on a window several stories high, or even a pea shooter, blowing dry peas at the glass for a softer wake-up. They would keep knocking until you were sure that you woke up. Some wouldn't leave until you waved or shouted. Customers paid a few pence a week for this service. It was commonly done by older men, women, or sometimes police constables looking to earn a little extra money on their dawn patrols. Believe it or not, this profession lasted well into the 20th century. By the 1940s and 50s, alarm clocks had become affordable, so the trade mostly died out. But in some parts of industrial England, knocker-ups kept on knocking up people until the early 1970s. That's right, while Apollo astronauts were walking on the moon, some folks in England were still being woken by Mary Smith shooting peas at their window. If your great-grandmother said, "The knocker-up came by," she wasn't being lewd. She just meant it was time to get up and go to work. This is one job we've pretty much all replaced with our smartphone alarms, though honestly, having a personal waker sounds kind of nice on those Monday mornings. Lamplighter. Before electric streetlights, cities were lit by gas or oil lamps that had to be lit every evening and doused at dawn. The lamplighter was the person who did that, making rounds with a ladder and a long pole with a flame on it to ignite each street lamp at dusk, then coming back at sunrise to snuff them out. They also refilled oil or gas mantles and cleaned the lamp glass. In some towns, lamplighters doubled as night watchmen, adding security to their illumination duties. Being a lamplighter was actually a respectable municipal job, a far cry from the gross occupations we discussed earlier. As the 1800s progressed, many street lamps got automatic igniters or timers, and by the late 19th century, electric bulbs started to replace gas flames. This meant lamplighters began to fade out. In the U.S., for example, the very first city with gas streetlights, Baltimore, removed nearly all of them by 1957 for electric lights. A few cities kept gas lamps for nostalgia, and indeed a few lamplighters are still employed today in places like London's Covent Garden or Zagreb, Croatia, purely for the historic charm. But as a widespread profession, the lamplighter peaked in the 19th century and was largely gone by the mid-20th. Next time you enjoy automatically timed streetlights, give a nod to those old lamplighters who used to jog down the streets, bringing a little light into the darkness one lamp at a time. Switchboard Operator. In the early days of telephones, making a call wasn't as simple as dialing a number. Instead, when you picked up the phone, an operator would answer and manually connect your call by plugging wires into a switchboard. Switchboard operators were usually young women, especially by the 1920s, as it was one of the few jobs available to women at the time. These operators worked at large switchboards filled with jacks and plugs. They had to memorize tons of phone numbers and quickly connect calls. They'd answer with, "Number, please," and handle everything from local calls to long-distance connections with other operators across cities. It was demanding work that required fast reflexes and good customer service, especially when callers got impatient or rowdy. As technology advanced, things started to change. The first automatic telephone exchange, which allowed dialing your own number, was invented in 1891. Slowly, automatic dialing systems were introduced, but it wasn't until the 1940s through the 1960s that automatic systems became widespread. In fact, a major strike by operators in 1945 pushed many businesses to switch to automatic systems faster. By the late 1960s, most urban areas had fully switched to automatic phones. However, in small towns, some operators kept working until the 1990s. Today, we hardly use live operators anymore, except for customer service. Bowling alley pinsetter. Before machines took over, bowling alleys employed people, often teenage boys, known as pinsetters or pin boys. After every bowl, the pinsetter had to quickly clear fallen pins and reset them in a triangle formation. It was a physically demanding job, often done at night with the sound of bowling balls and the haze of cigar smoke in the air. Pinsetters had to work fast because some bowlers didn't wait for them to finish before rolling the next ball. It was low-paying, hard work, but a common part-time job for kids back in the day. In 1936, an automatic pin-setting machine was invented, and by the 1950s, most bowling centers began to install them. The machines were faster and more reliable than human pin setters, and by the 1960s, most bowling alleys had switched to the machines. Some old-fashioned or small-town alleys still kept manual pin setters around for nostalgia, especially for special events, but the job of pin setter mostly had vanished. If your grandpa claims he used to set pins for a nickel, he's probably telling you the truth. Today, only machines set the pins, leaving the job of pinsetter a thing of the past. Elevator operator. Once upon a time, elevators in big buildings like department stores, hotels, and offices weren't automatic. Instead, you'd step into an elevator and be greeted by an operator, a person who controlled the elevator's movements. They would make sure the elevator stopped at the right floor and announce the floors as you went up or down. The operator would often line the elevator up exactly with the floor, a skill that took time to master. It wasn't just about operating the elevator, though operators also helped with customer service, answering questions, and acting like guides. In the 1940s, automatic elevators were introduced. At first, people were uneasy about using them and missed the personal touch of the elevator operator. But as more buildings switched to automatic elevators in the 1950s and 1960s, the need for operators dropped. The strike by elevator operators in 1945 also pushed many building owners to make the switch faster. By the 1970s, most places had automatic elevators, but some upscale hotels and buildings kept operators for a while. Today, we mostly hear pre-recorded voices in elevators instead of human operators. Ice cutter and ice delivery man. Before refrigerators, people needed ice to keep food cold, especially in warmer months. During winter, companies would harvest ice from lakes and rivers, storing it in big ice houses. The workers who cut the ice were called ice cutters. The ones who delivered it to the homes and businesses were known as icemen. Ice cutters used saws to cut large blocks of ice, some weighing hundreds of pounds, and then floated them to a spot where they could be lifted out. It was tough, cold work, long hours outside in freezing temperatures, handling heavy ice while trying to avoid frostbite and injury. Once the ice was stored in the ice house, the iceman would deliver it. He'd carry the ice blocks to houses, often using tongs, and leave them for people to use in their ice boxes, the precursors to modern refrigerators. This was common in colder areas like New England and Northern Europe. The ice business started to decline in the 1920s when electric refrigerators became available, but it didn't vanish immediately. It wasn't until the 1940s that refrigerators became cheap enough for most people to switch to. Today, the Iceman job no longer exists, but some towns still do ice cutting demonstrations as part of history lessons. The Milkman. In the middle of the 20th century, many families relied on milkmen to deliver fresh milk to their homes every morning. Milk delivery was important because without modern refrigeration, milk would spoil quickly. The milkman would load up a truck, or earlier a horse-drawn cart, with bottles of milk and go house to house, exchanging empty bottles for full ones. Sometimes milkmen also delivered other items like eggs and butter. The milkman became a friendly figure in many neighborhoods, and the sound of clinking bottles was something that people heard every morning. But by the 1970s and 80s, milk delivery started to disappear. Supermarkets made it easy for people to buy milk whenever they wanted, and refrigerators kept milk fresh longer. Also, packaging shifted from glass bottles to cartons, which didn't need to be returned. In some parts of the world, like the UK, milk delivery hung on for longer. And even today, there are some places that deliver milk in reusable glass bottles. However, seeing a milkman today is a rare sight. If your older relatives remember the milkman, they're recalling a job that mostly disappeared, replaced by modern shopping and home delivery services. And there you have it, a tour of bygone jobs from the age of knights in shining armor up to the atomic age. It's astonishing how much the employment landscape can change in just a few generations. Professions that were common knowledge to our ancestors are now quirky trivia, and tasks once done by thousands of human hands are now done by machines, or not done at all, because society no longer needs them. History isn't just wars and dates, it's also the story of ordinary people and how they made a living. Exploring these lost professions gives us a window into daily life in the past and makes us appreciate how far we've come. So when you next grumble about your office job or Zoom meeting, remember that not long ago your ancestors might have been digging cesspits by hand at midnight, or wading through leech-infested swamps, or collecting dog poo in a bucket to pay the bills. It sure puts things in perspective, doesn't it? As a genealogist and history lover, I find these old occupations fascinating. They show how creative and resilient people were, doing whatever odd jobs needed doing, and how technology and social progress have swept many of them away. In a sense, every generation has its jobs that disappear. Who knows, maybe 50 years from now, people will be reminiscing about extinct jobs like truck drivers, if self-driving vehicles take over, or cashiers, thanks to self-checkout and AI, or puzzling over what a video store clerk or a travel agent was. The only constant is change. Thank you for coming on this time-traveling journey through the world of historical professions. If you enjoyed this exploration, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more intriguing tales from history and family research. And I'd love to hear from you. Which old job surprised you or horrified you the most? Do you have any odd job titles in your own family history? Share in the comments. I would love to read them. And it's always amazing to hear what folks discover in their ancestry. Until next time, stay curious and appreciative of our modern comforts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.